U.S. economy shrinking 0.3% in the first quarter, significantly weaker than expected, a dramatic turnaround from the fourth quarter of last year, and all of that ahead of the tariff announcement.
Says President Trump's threat of tariffs is really weighing heavily on the company. Already, the automaker cut its earnings forecast this year by $1.5 billion and suspended its earnings guidance because of the uncertainty related to the tariffs and President Trump's big, beautiful tax bill.
The U.S. economy is contracting. A 0.3% GDP drop in Q1 2025, not catastrophic on paper, but in context, it's a siren. A reversal, fast and sharp, from late 2024 optimism. And crucially, this downturn hits before the new tariffs fully land. At the center of the storm, Ford Motor Company, once a pillar of American industrial pride, now a test subject for a radical shift in national economic doctrine. Once a global manufacturer, now a frontline casualty in a policy war wrapped in patriotism. This isn't about one company missing a quarter, it's about the collision between 21st century industrial systems and a return to 20th century trade logic. What happens when economic nationalism tries to reverse engineer globalization by decree? Ford is finding out in real time in blood and metal. The warning signs came fast. A revised earnings outlook slashed by $1.5 billion, a full-year forecast withdrawn, not delayed, not reduced, erased. The company cannot see past the fog of political unpredictability, and it's not alone. The trigger, a 25% tariff on imported light-duty vehicles, meant to stimulate U.S. domestic production. The reality, a shockwave tearing through supply chains from Mexico to Ontario to Beijing. Ford raised prices on 3 models built in Mexico. Not because they wanted to, because they had to. Cost spikes left no room for strategic hesitation. Worse still, the company halted all exports to China. The Chinese government responded with retaliatory tariffs reaching 145%. That closes off one of Ford's most critical overseas markets. Billions in future sales, gone, overnight. But behind this headline, war over factories and tariffs, lies something more dangerous, more quietly devastating: the electric vehicle time bomb. Nearly every automaker has bet their future on EVs, on cleaner platforms, on battery systems sourced across borders. But if the trade war expands, and there's no sign it won't, the entire EV transition could stall. It's not just a supply issue, it's a climate issue, a policy issue, a generational issue. Back to the balance sheet. Ford's Q1 net income collapsed to $473 million. That's down nearly 65% from $1.3 billion a year earlier. Total revenue fell 5% to $46 billion. And despite beating some analysts' revised expectations, the stock dropped more than 2% in after-hours trading. The message from markets was clear: hope is not a strategy. And Ford isn't the only one feeling the pain. General Motors withdrew its own 2025 forecast, shelved a $4 billion stock buyback, postponed investor calls. Why? Because the economic models they used to plan the year are now worthless. The assumptions underpinning everything from supply sourcing to profit margins are breaking down. This is no longer a quarterly hiccup, it's structural reordering. What we're watching unfold is the forced disentanglement of modern manufacturing, a reshoring movement driven not by efficiency, but by politics. The result? Volatility, delays, reactions, not strategy. Take Canada. In Ontario, union leaders at GM plants issued a sobering message to workers: avoid major purchases, postpone new loans, prepare for disruption. The fear? Tariffs will bring production to a halt within days. Some plants already have. Others remain operational barely but under growing strain. And the instability is contagious. Japanese automakers like Toyota and Honda, no major disruptions yet, but they admit the situation is highly fluid. Uncertainty is contagious, and no supply chain is immune. In response, the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association, representing Ford, GM, and Stellantis, publicly urged policymakers to uphold the spirit of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, not out of idealism, out of survival. But solidarity is fracturing. Canadian labor unions are united in their opposition to tariffs. Their U.S. counterparts are not. The United Auto Workers Union came out in favor of the tariffs. UAW President Shawn Fain called them a corrective measure after years of factory closures in towns like Lordstown, Ohio. He didn't mention Canadian workers. This split reveals a new tension in labor. Cross-border unity is dead. Now it's national interest versus national interest, even among unions. And in this fractured environment, automakers are improvising. Stellantis is shifting truck production from Mexico back to the U.S. It sounds like a victory for domestic manufacturing. It's not. It's triage, a short-term pivot made under duress. Restructuring global operations is not a one-quarter project. It takes years, billions, and stable policy which no longer exists. Investors see the cracks, and they're exiting early. This isn't just about profit and loss. This is a foundational shift in how cars are built, where they're built, and who pays the price when policy meets production. The margin for error is gone, and the future, it's hanging by a thread. The cost of disruption is spreading, and it's not limited to automakers anymore. It's engulfing the entire North American industrial ecosystem. Suppliers in Mexico, Canada, and the US are being squeezed. Many of them run on razor-thin margins. They can't absorb months of delays or shifting production mandates from Detroit. Orders are being cut, investment plans shelved. Some have already begun layoffs even before assembly lines stop turning. And here comes the real blowback, the one no one saw coming: electric vehicles. Once the darling of climate legislation, investor hype, and infrastructure subsidies, now facing an existential bottleneck. Not from lack of consumer interest, not from lack of technological innovation, but from the geopolitics of supply. Most of the core components that power EVs, batteries, electric motors, power electronics, semiconductors, are imported, often from Asia. If tariffs extend to these categories, the North American EV pipeline doesn't just slow down, it breaks. Mass market EVs become unviable. Price tags jump, launch timelines evaporate, and with each delay comes a missed emissions target. That's not speculation, that's math. Every year of delay in EV rollout means millions more gasoline-powered vehicles remain on the road, millions more tons of CO2 emitted, billions in clean energy investments wasted. Climate strategy doesn't care about trade wars, but it will suffer from them. Already battery suppliers in Ontario and Nuevo Leon are pulling back on expansion plans. Their reasons? Policy instability, unclear future pricing, tariff exposure. These aren't startups. These are key links in the North American EV chain, and they're hitting pause. Public-private partnerships meant to build national charging infrastructure are stalling too. Why? Forecasts are falling apart. No one knows what EV demand will look like 6 months from now. That uncertainty makes funding harder, makes project timelines stretch, makes the clean energy transition look more like a theory than a plan. This is where it gets dangerous. Governments are still pushing incentives, tax credits, rebates, infrastructure grants, but those policies rely on affordability, on scale. If the cost of EV production rises due to tariffs, fewer consumers qualify, fewer cars get sold, demand shrinks, production contracts. We risk creating a two-tiered EV market. Luxury models for the upper class, delays or cancellations for affordable mass-market vehicles, the kind of vehicles needed to meet climate equity goals, the kind everyday buyers rely on. This is the contradiction at the center of today's economic policy. You cannot simultaneously champion domestic manufacturing revival and seamless green energy transition without coordination. Without a shared roadmap, these goals cancel each other out. Ford and GM are caught in this squeeze. Their leadership has to juggle Wall Street expectations, workforce pressures, and Washington politics. Each move, where to build, how to price, when to launch, is now a political calculation as much as a market one. And the smaller players? They don't have that luxury. Suppliers can't hedge across nations, workers can't move plants. Consumers can't wait 3 years for a price-corrected EV. This isn't about Ford anymore. It's about the system that built Ford, and whether it can survive a policy environment that changes faster than a production line can be retooled. Will tariffs even last? That's the billion-dollar question. Political will can be fierce, until it meets consumer backlash, or dealership lots filled with unsold inventory, or state climate agencies missing their emissions caps. When those signals arrive, and they will, the pressure to reverse course may become irresistible. But even if the tariffs are lifted, the damage is done. Global suppliers no longer trust the U.S. trade environment. Cross-border labor alliances have fractured. EV investment strategies are being rewritten with risk premiums baked in. What used to be an efficient, integrated market is now being rebuilt as a politically sensitive zone of uncertainty. This is the new industrial reality, where resilience matters more than speed, where redundancy is built into supply chains, where trade deals are temporary and every cost estimate has an asterisk. Manufacturing is no longer just a business, it's a geopolitical calculation. And it's not just Ford, it's energy, tech, semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, every strategic sector that has outsourced efficiency now faces the same test. Can you rebuild domestic capacity without destroying cost models, timelines, or investor confidence? The lessons from Ford are clear. First, tariffs may sound strong in speeches, but they create ripples that destabilize everything from pricing to infrastructure. Second, climate policy and trade policy cannot operate on parallel tracks. They must converge, or they will collide. Third, industrial sovereignty requires more than slogans. It demands planning, coordination, and an honest reckoning with global interdependence. Because here's the truth, you can move factories, you can reroute suppliers, but you can't move time. You can't delay climate deadlines, you can't hit pause on competition. And once lost, trust, market share, labor stability, those things don't come back easily. This is not the first time Ford has faced existential pressure, but unlike past recessions or product flops, this isn't an internal failure, it's a systemic realignment. And the outcome won't just reshape Ford's future. It will determine what kind of economy North America builds, and who gets left behind. This is not just a corporate story. This is a test of 21st century economic strategy. A stress test for globalization, for resilience, and for climate transition timelines. Because in the end, the question isn't, will tariffs work? It's, can we afford the cost of their consequences?